How's it going, everyone? This is my week 7 video on 5 practices for teaching vocabulary to English language learners. Currently filming on a boat, so hopefully that doesn't provide any issues as far as audio or anything, but should be fine. Anyways, let's get right into it. So the first one that I picked up on that I really loved was from the Judith Moskovich video, so specifically from a mathematics context. But she points out that, well, one huge idea of hers is that teaching English language learners and teaching English fluent speakers, there's a lot of overlap as far as what's effective and what students need. I thought that was really interesting. I'm going to be at a school this year, which there are very few English language learners, and so certainly this is all very important, and I'm going to come across some, but a majority of my students aren't going to be. But I just thought it was interesting that a lot of these strategies are pertinent to all students. One that really stood out was she says to focus on mathematical practices and not vocabulary, which I thought was interesting because obviously vocabulary is something that we need as mathematicians to be able to communicate these concepts. But what she's arguing is that if you focus on the mathematical process, the vocabulary will come and they'll start to be using the terms as needed. But rather than trying to have them think, oh, I need to just memorize these words, just know the definition of these words, we'd rather have them using the words and the terms and the ideas in a mathematical way. Because ultimately that's what mathematicians do. It's not so much they're really good at memorizing words, it's that they're really good at using words as needed. And so that was an idea that she presented that I thought was really good. Um, Next, so from the Melissa Barno article titled "Even Math Requires Learning Academic Language." I love the idea that she calls "Get Moving." In this one, we talked about in class. One of the math groups drew out the sketch of the different arm actions you can use to symbolize the different graphs of different parent functions. And but I think getting students active, one, they talked about it in Brain Rules, and I'm sure there's a bunch of other research on it, but you just learn better when you're a little bit more active and engaged. And I remember being in so many high school classes that were just kind of boring, and that's a big challenge for teachers to try to overcome. And but by getting students out of their seats and moving around, like if nothing else, it's fun and engaging. And I think it's always easy to sell students a little short, like, oh, they'll think this is stupid. And but I think for the most part, like students like engaging in that kind of stuff, and it's different and it's exciting. And hey, I don't have to sit here and just take notes. Um, so doing things like that, getting students up and active, and have something to pair a word to, like, oh, like this word. I remember we did that dance move to this, or whatever it is. So I think that's a great concept and something that I hope as a teacher I can really make use of because, yeah, again, it's just fun and it's kind of it's hard to expect students to learn much if they're bored. Anyways, so number 3, I would say that so from the Stanford paper titled "Principles of Mathematics Instruction for ELLs." This one's the big one for me, and it's that it said treat every day in home languages as resources, not obstacles. Uh, to me, it means a couple different things. For an English language learner who is fluent in another language, being able to utilize that language, and we talked about maybe it's having a vocabulary wall and putting terms up in multiple languages, or it is allowing students to explain themselves in their own language and then try and do it in English after. Whatever it is, just making sure it's known that like learning in that language for them is not wrong. And we'd hope they'll be able to get to a point where they can communicate in English. But ultimately, going back to the Judith Moskovich video, like we want them to focus on the mathematical practices. We don't want them to spend all their time worried about English vocabulary and then not catch any of the math. And so again, so we want so we want to use that home language as a resource. And then with non-English language speakers, this still applies because it's that everyday vernacular that I think math teachers can really make use of. And this whole idea of applying math vocabulary to the context of students, well, we might as well use the terms they're using. And so an easy example would be instead of different types of translations or dilations to graph, we can say slide, or we can say flip, or we can say stretch, and these kind of things. and that's going to be a way for students to connect these math concepts to their current way of thinking, their current context. So I think that's a really big thing for math teachers to make use of, and not something where I think a lot of times we can think, they need to be speaking in math language like mathematicians, and we hope that they would get there. But I think a way for them to get there is to attach the math content to their context and their way of thinking, and then the math language will come. Number 4. So this one's also from the Stanford paper, but focus on students' mathematical reasoning, not accuracy in language. And this one ties back into the Moscovich video as well. But yeah, especially with English language learners, they're going to probably say things wrong. And they're going to say things wrong just in normal English speak. They're going to maybe, whether it's grammar or whatever, there's going to be slight issues there. And then as well as with mathematical terms, they may not say things perfectly as a mathematician would in English. But if the mathematical reasoning is there and you're able to track their line of thinking, I think the point here would be that the focus shouldn't be on, you have to say this perfectly. The focus should be, hey, we want their thinking to be in line with where it should be. And if it's there, I just feel like language is something that we don't want English language learners to feel like, because I can't say this perfect, I either shouldn't participate or I'm behind in math. Because you can be learning English but still be very proficient in mathematics and be able to think like a mathematician. And so if the thinking is there and the mathematical reasoning is there, we shouldn't punish English language learners for learning English. It should be something that comes with time, but hopefully the mathematical thinking can be there, and that should be the focus. And then the last point that I really took was, so from that Barno journal article, even math requires learning academic language, and it's the concept of journaling. And this gets back to students being able to use their own vernacular and being able to communicate in a way that makes sense to them. So giving students a chance to either summarize at the end of a lesson what they learned, or as part of a homework assignment, describe in their own words some sort of mathematical practice. I just really think students engaging with their own way of thinking, and basically I don't think we should make students try and think in different terms within math than they would regularly. I think as much as we can, we should engage students where they are, and at that point it becomes a part of their context and their thinking. It's not like, I have this one way of thinking, but then when I go to math class I have to forget all these words because those words are wrong. I have to apply only the math words. I think journaling is another way to get them to take what they're learning in class and say it in a way that makes sense to them. And if there's issues in like they're not getting the ideas correctly and the way they're describing it is just a little bit off, hopefully the teacher can have a way of checking those journals and just making sure understanding's there. But as long as teachers are checking for understanding and students are describing in a correct manner these mathematical concepts, again, the concern shouldn't be that, they're not using every word perfectly like a real mathematician would, because again, that'll come in time. But I think if students are tracking, the vocabulary will come, and the focus should always be on mathematical reasoning over strictly just vocabulary for vocabulary's sake. That's what I took away this week. Again, I think it's all very applicable and important going into my first year teaching.